Stop. Don't scroll past this. Because if you're hearing this right now, you're not early, and you're not late either. You're right on the edge of something that only happens once. This is not another awakening video. This is not another message you can come back to later. Because what you're about to hear isn't designed to repeat. It doesn't recycle. It doesn't chase you. It appears once, and only when you're ready to understand it. Think about the last few weeks, or maybe months. Something changed, didn't it? The signs that used to follow you, 11 patterns, synchronicities, they started fading. The intensity dropped, the pull softened, and part of you wondered, did I lose it? Did I disconnect? Did I do something wrong? No, you didn't lose the signal. The signal completed its job. Because there comes a point in every real transformation where guidance stops appearing. Not because you've been abandoned, but because you've been trusted. And most people never reach that point. They stay in the phase of searching, seeking, chasing signs, forever waiting for the next confirmation. But if you're here right now, something very different is happening. You've crossed out of activation and into completion. And that changes everything. Because once the cycle is complete, you're no longer being guided step by step. You're expected to stand on your own frequency, to hold it, to live it, to become it, without needing constant reassurance that you're on the right path. This is the part no one talks about. The silence after the signal. The stillness after the shift. And if you don't understand it, you'll mistake it for loss, when it's actually the highest level of progression. So if this message reached you, right now at this exact moment, then understand this clearly. This isn't the beginning of your journey. This is the final confirmation that you've already arrived at a new level, and what you do next defines everything. Before we go deeper, lock this moment and hit like, subscribe if you're ready to step into full awareness, and in the comments write, CYCLE Compet. And I want you to add one more thing. Tell me what part of the country you're watching from, because what you're experiencing right now is happening to a very specific group of people across the world. There is a phase in every genuine transformation that feels like an ending, but is actually a transition into something far more stable and self-sustaining. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with intensity or overwhelming emotion. Instead, it appears as a quiet shift, a subtle but undeniable absence of what used to guide you. And for most people, this absence is misunderstood. You might have noticed it already. The signs that once felt constant, repeating numbers, meaningful coincidences, perfectly timed messages, have slowed down or stopped entirely. The strong emotional surges that used to accompany your awareness, the sense of being pulled in a direction, the feeling that something was actively guiding your attention, it's no longer as intense as it once was. At first, this creates confusion, because during the earlier stages of your transformation, these signals were proof. They were reinforcement. They acted as confirmation that you were moving in the right direction, that something beyond your ordinary perception was interacting with you. And naturally, when that interaction becomes less visible, the mind tries to interpret it based on its previous patterns. It assumes loss, it assumes disconnection. It assumes that something went wrong. But what if none of those assumptions are true? What if the silence you're experiencing is not a withdrawal but a graduation? To understand this, you have to step back and look at the entire process from a structural perspective rather than an emotional one. Every stage of awareness development follows a pattern. It begins with disruption. Something breaks the normal flow of your perception. This could be a realization, an experience, or even a period of discomfort that forces you to question what you previously accepted as reality. That disruption creates openness. Once you become open, you begin to notice more. Patterns, connections, meanings that were always present but filtered out before. This is where the signs begin, not because something external suddenly decided to communicate with you, but because your perception has expanded enough to recognize patterns that were previously invisible. During this phase, reinforcement is necessary. Your awareness is still stabilizing, and without consistent feedback, it would easily collapse back into old patterns, so your environment appears to respond more directly. You notice synchronicities, repeating sequences, moments of alignment that feel almost too precise to be random. These experiences strengthen your trust in what you're perceiving. They help you move from doubt into recognition. But this stage is not meant to last forever. because reliance on external confirmation creates dependency. If you only trust your awareness when it is validated by something outside of you, then your state is not stable. It is conditional, and conditional awareness cannot evolve into sovereignty. This is where the shift begins. At a certain point, once your perception has become consistent enough, the reinforcement starts to fade. Not abruptly, but gradually. The signals become less frequent. The emotional intensity decreases. The sense of being guided step by step softens. And this is where the real test begins. Because now you are faced with a choice that is not presented as a choice. You can either interpret the silence as loss and start searching for the old signals again, or you can recognize that the absence of guidance is itself a form of guidance. Most people choose the first path. They begin chasing the feeling they once had. They look for the signs that used to appear, trying to recreate the intensity of their initial experiences. And in doing so, they unknowingly lower their awareness back into dependency. They move from being present to being reactive, from observing to seeking. But those who move forward take a different approach. They stop searching, not because they've given up, but because they've understood something deeper. The purpose of the signals was never to stay. It was to train perception. And once perception is trained, the signals are no longer necessary. This is what the silence represents. It is not emptiness. It is independence. It is the moment where your awareness is no longer being shaped by external patterns, but is expected to stabilize from within. And this is where the concept of crystallization becomes important. Activation is the phase where your awareness expands. Crystallization is the phase where that expansion becomes permanent. During activation, everything feels dynamic. New insights, new perceptions, new experiences. It can feel exciting, even overwhelming at times, but it is also unstable. Without continuous reinforcement, it can fluctuate. Crystallization is different. It is quieter, but stronger. Instead of constant change, there is consistency. Instead of intense highs and lows, there is balance. Instead of needing confirmation, there is knowing. And that knowing does not come from outside. It comes from alignment. Alignment between what you perceive, what you understand, and how you act. When these elements are in sync, your awareness becomes stable. It no longer depends on external signals because it has become self-sustaining. This is the stage many people never reach, because it requires something that the earlier stages do not: responsibility. During activation, you are guided. During crystallization, you are accountable. Your thoughts matter more, because they are no longer being corrected by external patterns. Your actions matter more, because they define your state without immediate feedback. Your focus matters more, because it determines the direction of your awareness without visible reinforcement. And this is why the silence feels so significant. It removes the training wheels. It places you in a position where your awareness must stand on its own. And while this can feel uncertain at first, it is also the point where real stability becomes possible. Because anything that requires constant external input is not truly stable, it is maintained. True stability comes from internal coherence, from the ability to remain aware without being reminded, from the ability to stay aligned without being corrected, from the ability to trust your perception without needing proof. And this is what defines completion of a cycle, not the presence of extraordinary experiences, but the absence of dependency on them. So if you are experiencing this silence, this reduction in signs, this shift from intensity to stillness, understand what it actually means. It means the process worked. It means your awareness reached a level where it no longer needs constant reinforcement. It means you have moved from being guided to being capable of guiding yourself. And that transition is not a downgrade. It is the highest form of progression within this structure. Because from this point forward, your development is no longer driven by external triggers. It is driven by conscious choice, what you focus on, how you respond, what you align with. These decisions now shape your state directly, without the need for visible confirmation. And while this may seem less exciting than the earlier stages, it is far more powerful. Because it is consistent, it is reliable, it is yours. And this is where the idea of a final message becomes clear. A final message is not about receiving new information. It is about recognizing that you already have what you need, that the cycle of seeking, receiving, and validating has reached its natural conclusion, and that what comes next is not another phase of searching, but a phase of living what you have already understood. So if you feel the silence, don't rush to fill it. Don't assume something is missing. Don't go backwards trying to recreate what has already served its purpose. Because the silence is not the end of the connection. It is the beginning of sovereignty. As the silence settles and becomes familiar instead of uncomfortable, something deeper begins to reveal itself, not as a sudden realization, but as a gradual recognition that what you once depended on externally has already been integrated internally. This is the phase where most people hesitate, not because they lack understanding, but because they are no longer being prompted, corrected, or reassured in the ways they were before. It feels like standing without support for the first time, even though you've already learned how to balance. And this is where the final transformation either stabilizes permanently or begins to weaken depending on how you respond to it. To understand what is happening here, you have to clearly distinguish between activation and what comes after it. Activation is an opening. It disrupts your previous patterns and introduces you to a broader awareness. It is intense because it needs to be. Without that intensity, it would not break through the layers of conditioning that keep perception narrow and repetitive. But intensity is not meant to be permanent. It is a catalyst, not a foundation. What you are entering now is something far more refined and far more stable, but also far less dramatic. This stage is what can be described as crystallization. It is the process where everything you have experienced, learned, and perceived begins to settle into a consistent structure within you. Instead of constantly changing, your awareness becomes steady. Instead of searching for new insights, you begin to live from the ones you already have. And this is where many people misinterpret the experience, because it does not feel like progress in the way they expect. There are fewer emotional highs, fewer external confirmations, fewer moments that feel extraordinary. But what replaces them is something far more valuable: clarity without fluctuation. Clarity in this stage is not something you chase. It is something you operate from. You begin to notice that your decisions require less overthinking. Your reactions become more measured. Situations that would have triggered confusion or emotional intensity before now feel manageable, almost neutral. This is not because life has become easier, but because your relationship with it has changed. You are no longer reacting from unconscious patterns. You are responding from awareness. And this is where the idea of the 3 final tests becomes relevant, not as external challenges placed in your path, but as natural conditions that reveal whether your awareness is truly stable or still dependent on the structures of the earlier phase. These tests do not appear as obvious events. They are subtle, embedded in everyday experiences, and easy to overlook if you are not paying attention. The first test is the absence of confirmation. There will be moments where you make decisions, take actions, or follow your intuition without receiving immediate feedback. No signs, no synchronicities, no clear validation. In these moments, the question is simple but profound. Do you trust your awareness without needing proof? If your confidence depends on external confirmation, you will hesitate, doubt, and potentially revert to seeking reassurance. But if your awareness is stabilized, you will move forward with clarity, not because you are certain of the outcome, but because you are aligned with your understanding. The second test is the return of old patterns, not as a regression but as an opportunity to observe. Situations may arise that resemble past experiences where you reacted unconsciously. The difference now is that you can see them clearly. You can feel the pull of the old response, but you are not controlled by it. This is where your awareness proves itself, not by avoiding the pattern, but by choosing differently in its presence. Each time you do this, the pattern loses its influence, and your state becomes more stable. The third test is the temptation to go backwards. This is perhaps the most subtle and the most common. When the intensity of activation fades, there is a natural inclination to try to recreate it, to seek out the same feelings, the same signs, the same sense of being guided step by step. But this is a misunderstanding of the process. Going backwards does not restore the experience. It disrupts the stability you have built. The real progression is not in recreating the past, but in fully stepping into the present without needing the past to validate it. Passing these tests does not require perfection. It requires awareness. It requires recognizing what is happening in the moment and choosing alignment over reaction. And with each conscious choice, your state becomes more coherent, more stable, more consistent. This is what defines sovereignty in this context. Not control over external circumstances, but consistency and internal alignment regardless of those circumstances. And this is where the concept of radical integrity becomes essential. Integrity, in its simplest form, is alignment between what you know and how you act. During the earlier stages, it is possible to understand something deeply and still behave in contradiction to it, because the external reinforcement compensates for that inconsistency. But in this stage, there is no compensation. If your actions are not aligned with your understanding, your state becomes fragmented. That fragmentation creates instability, and instability weakens the clarity you have developed. Radical integrity means closing that gap completely. It means that your actions reflect your awareness, not occasionally, but consistently. It means that you do not wait for external pressure or confirmation to act in alignment. You do it because it is the natural expression of your state. And while this may seem demanding, it actually simplifies everything. Because when there is no conflict between what you know and what you do, your energy is no longer divided. It becomes focused, directed, and stable. This stability is what allows you to maintain your frequency without effort. Not because you are forcing yourself to stay aware, but because awareness has become your default state. You no longer need reminders, techniques, or constant reflection to stay aligned. It happens naturally as a result of consistency over time. And this is where the idea of a new contract becomes relevant. Not a literal agreement, but a shift in responsibility. During the earlier phases, your role was to observe, to learn, to expand your awareness. Now your role is to embody it, to live in a way that reflects the clarity you have gained, to make decisions that are aligned with your understanding, to navigate your environment from a place of awareness rather than reaction. This does not mean withdrawing from life or becoming detached from reality. It means engaging with it differently, more consciously, more deliberately, more consistently. It means that your presence itself becomes stable, not influenced by every external change, but grounded in your internal alignment. And this is where the concept of guardianship can be understood in a practical way. It is not about protecting something external or taking on a role defined by others. It is about maintaining the integrity of your own awareness, about not allowing it to be diluted by unconscious patterns, distractions, or external pressures, about holding a standard within yourself that does not depend on the environment around you. This is not something that happens instantly. It develops through repetition, through consistency, through daily choices that reinforce your alignment. And over time, it becomes automatic, not because you are no longer aware, but because awareness is integrated into everything you do. At this point, the absence of external signals is no longer noticeable as a loss. It becomes irrelevant, because you are no longer looking outside for confirmation of what you already know internally. Your clarity does not depend on signs. Your direction does not depend on guidance. Your state does not depend on conditions. And this is where the meaning of completion becomes clear. It is not the end of growth. It is the end of dependency within that phase of growth. It is the point where what was once external has become internal, and what was once temporary has become stable. So if you are here now, experiencing this quiet, this stillness, this absence of the intensity that once defined your process, understand what it actually represents. It is not the end of your connection. It is the confirmation that the connection has been fully integrated. You are no longer being guided in the same way because you no longer need to be. You are no longer receiving constant signs because your awareness no longer requires reinforcement. You are no longer searching because you have already found what you were looking for, even if it does not feel as dramatic as you expected, and this is why this message does not repeat. Not because it cannot, but because it does not need to. Once understood, it becomes part of your perception. Once integrated, it becomes part of your state. And once lived, it becomes part of who you are. So what remains now is simple. Not easy, but simple. Continue to align. Continue to observe. Continue to act from awareness rather than reaction, not because you are trying to achieve something new, but because you are maintaining what has already been established. And in doing so, you will notice something subtle but powerful. Your experience will not become more intense, it will become more consistent, less dramatic but more reliable, less reactive but more clear, less dependent but more stable. And that stability is what defines true completion. Not a final moment, but a continuous state. Not something you reach and leave behind, but something you carry forward into everything that follows. Because the cycle did not end to stop you. It ended to free you.